It's Monday, 1 o'clock. Guess who's here? Welcome to the first day of autumn 2019 and the first Deal Doctor live stream for autumn 2019. Couldn't ask for a more beautiful day out there, at least here in Grand Rapids. Looks great. Today, I want to talk about a thread that was started over the weekend on regarding seller's disclosure. And Kelly DeHaan asked a great question. It said, is an estate required to fill out the seller's disclosure form? Or can they put never lived in the property? And first of all, thank you, Kelly, for asking it, because it's a great question and one that we get a lot of. We see a lot of seller's disclosure forms that come through that are scribbled across and it says never lived in the property. Usually those properties, or very often those properties, are investor properties. They are flips or rentals that an investor is selling, and they think that they're exempt from seller's disclosure because it's a rental and they've never lived in the property, or it's a flip and have never lived in the property. That's not true. They are not exempt from seller's disclosure. An investor is not exempt, period. So if you'll get pushback on that, by the way, from agents, from even our company and others who say that an investor is exempt from the seller's disclosure form. I'm sorry, the landlord is exempt from the seller's disclosure form. But if you read the law, which I provided a link in the thread on Facebook over the weekend, if you read that interpretation by McClellan and Anderson, which was written for the Michigan Realtors Association, it makes it very clear that landlords are not exempt from the seller's disclosure form, from completing the seller's disclosure form and providing it to a buyer. So the question then that we really wanted to deal with, most of all, is, first of all, I encourage you to click on that link and read what is provided. It's it's about 10 pages there of the white paper that was written for the Michigan Realtors on the interpretation of the Seller's Disclosure Act. So there are a number of exemptions, not just estates, but others. The estate is one of them. A court order, any transfer that happens as a result of a court order, probate, foreclosure, bankruptcy, condemnation, all of those are exempt from providing a seller's disclosure form. Transfers by a fiduciary who does not occupy the property, that's an essential part right there, who does not occupy the property, and that is an estate, a guardianship, a conservatorship, or trust. In the example of a trust, make sure the certificate of trust specifies that the trustee is authorized to sell real estate owned by the trust. Co-tenants, let's say that 3 college students get together and they decide that they're going to buy a house and rent out a couple of units and live in one as they go to college. Then one of them decides to quit college and wants to sell his or her interest to the other co-owners. That person who is selling is not required to complete a seller's disclosure form to the other co-owners because they already reside in the property. So they know the condition of the property just as well as the one who's selling his or her interest in it. A grandparent down to a grandchild. A spouse, if a spouse is selling the house to the other spouse, not required to fill out a seller's disclosure form. The straight familial line is the test here, from grandparent to grandchild, parent to parent to child to grandchild. That straight familial line is exempt from providing a seller's disclosure form. Now you might ask, what about siblings? Law doesn't address that. It is non-specific about that. So I would say that they probably are required to fill it out. A divorce judgment. Anytime there's a divorce, the a transfer based on a divorce, the sellers are not required to fill out a disclosure form. Now, that's an interesting one because we run into that one a lot. And there he goes. Anyway, we run into that a lot. And it's a question that comes up quite often. Is a divorcing couple required to fill out a seller's disclosure form? Well, according to the law, transfers resulting from a judgment of divorce. Now, the question is that judgment of divorce a transfer to the other spouse, or is it a court-ordered sale? If it is a judgment to the other spouse, it falls under the spouse-to-spouse transfer, which, by the way, was ordered by the court, so they would be exempt. If it is a court-ordered sale, if the judgment says you must sell the house, you don't have a choice here. You have to hire a realtor and get the house sold. Then the question is, are the sellers, this divorcing couple, are they required to provide a seller's disclosure form? According to McClellan and Anderson's interpretation, they are not. Interesting. I would have thought otherwise. So, and then new construction that it's never been occupied. If a builder builds a house and has it available for sale and has never moved in the house, that house is still protected under the exemption under the Seller's Disclosure Act. If they move into the house, even for a day, it is considered to have been an occupied residence. Now, so again, if you will, please read that because I think it will be enlightening to you. In the course of the thread, Tim Creech down in Jackson, welcome Tim, you're probably out there. I know you're out there most of the time, you and Anna. Hey. In the course of the thread, Tim noted that some attorneys' opinion is that if an executor of an estate resided in the property at one time, disclosing what they know about the property may reduce the risk of being sued later if material defects are found in the property which the executor knew about and did not disclose. If that sounds confusing, let me give you a couple of examples because it should sound confusing. For example, the home had an attic fire in 1978 when the executor was a teenager. The executor knows there was some damage to the rafters, but doesn't know if any repairs were made in 1978 or since. Or the executor remembers that Dad argued with the neighbor about the fence between their properties for years, whose parcel it was on, who was responsible for maintaining it, etc. But the executor doesn't know if there was ever any resolution. The question: how does an executor know that nothing was done over the past 40 years to fix the material defect that the executor thinks he or she knows? Seems to me that if an executor is going to disclose a condition he or she should know that he or she knew about in the past, they would be, number one, wise to confirm before disclosing that condition that it remains that way today. And two, suggest that they have any questions about it, they should follow their attorney's advice. We cannot give them legal advice. The letter of the law states that estates are exempt, but Tim's got a good question, and so I posed it to Gail Anderson, our attorney and partner in McClellan and Anderson. I asked her if there was any time which never lived in the property was fulfilled the requirements of the seller's disclosure statute. I also asked her about the issue of whether or not a person, a child who is now the executor, once lived in the property maybe 10, 20, 30 years ago, hasn't lived in the property and is now handling the sale for the estate, whether they are required to present a seller's disclosure form in that particular case about what they know. Here's her answer. I want you to listen carefully to it because it's pretty complex. She says, I also always tell members not to discourage executors from disclosing anything. Even if exempt, an executor may choose to voluntarily disclose something because he or she doesn't want a post-closing hassle, i.e. lawsuit, or because of a belief that it's simply the right thing to do. Okay. But if they're going to disclose a particular fact, they may want to do it outside of the seller's disclosure form. Just because I want to disclose a 30-year-ago fire doesn't mean that I want to voluntarily assume all of the Seller's Disclosure Act disclosure responsibilities. In other words, if I'm going to give you a partially completed form, even voluntarily, I have to answer all of the questions to the best of my ability. I know of no cases, this is Gail continuing, I know of no cases that address the responsibilities of a fiduciary that lived in the house as a child. It seems silly, but I can see the argument. The statute says never, and the courts tend to strictly interpret statutes these days. If I'm exempt, I have no obligation to give you a form that says never lived there. If I am not exempt, but have never lived there, I might fill out the form to the best of my ability and also say never lives there as some qualifier. So, I hope that made it clear. It's a tough question to sort out, and again, I thank Tim for his question because there are two sides. There is the exempt, which says even touching pen to paper is not required under the Seller's Disclosure Act. There is the other side of it that says, well, yeah, but if I want to, if as a seller I want to disclose what I know, then you can voluntarily do that. What I'm hearing from Gail is if an executor wants to do that, wants to disclose voluntarily what they knew at a given point in time, they should probably write that out aside from the seller's disclosure form, that they can say, back in 1978 there was a fire. Don't know whatever happened. I know there was some damage. I don't know if it ever got fixed. And I know my dad used to argue with the neighbor about the fence, but I don't know if what the resolution was. So if they want to do that voluntarily, it might be wise to do it aside from the seller's disclosure form, which they can claim an exemption for. So, bottom line, if you're working with an executor of an estate in which the executor once lived, you have a couple of options. Number one, if they fill out any part of the seller's disclosure, they should fill it all out, even if most of it is unknown. The executor may write an explanatory letter instead of a seller's disclosure, which tells the buyer what he or she knows about the property, with the disclaimer that the executor does not have any updated information unless they do. Number three is the biggie. Suggest they consult the estate's attorney, which eliminates our liability altogether when we send them back to their attorney. I'll get to pricing in just a second. So I hope that helps clarify. It is a complex question. There are a lot of moving parts there. So again, I encourage you to go in and look at the document that's in there that I've provided the link to. First day of fall. Wow, we're heading into the final stretch of 2019. Well, last quarter, basically. And a lot of houses are still out there for sale. There are still a lot of homes that are getting multiple offers. I still get calls every day, as I know Eric does, about how to handle multiple offers and competitive offers, over the asking price offers, all of those things. We're still getting a lot of calls for that. But we're also seeing a bit of a trend, which is Could be very seasonal. It could be a situation where, we see this every year. About this time of year, people start pulling their houses off the market going, well, I tried it this year, maybe next year I'll try it again. We don't know what 2020 is going to bring as far as a real estate market. We've had essentially 8 to 10 strong years of growth. So it's probably starting about maybe 7. But the point is, we've had a long stretch of solid growth in the real estate industry, the real estate homes values. So will that continue? I don't know. There's no way to tell. We have some, there seems to be a little bit of concern in the stock market. We've got some news going on, and we have an election year coming up, and election years tend to be very soft in the real estate business because people kind of say, well, I'm going to wait and see what happens. So I don't know what 2020 is going to bring. I think the important thing, though, for your clients' benefit, your sellers that you have listed, or you may even list yet this year, is to sell them, to price them to sell now. Price them to sell within the next 30 days. Because by November 15th, we're going to see a slowing down for the holidays. And then we're going to pretty much be hitting a slump until the first of the year. So if you have a listing, I would go back to your sellers and find out whether or not they're still motivated, if they're more motivated than they were before, and how are you going to crank up the activity. If you're not getting 3 to 5 3 to 5 showings a week, you're not even getting close to an offer, in my opinion. I think that you have to have more activity than that, more frequent than that, more compact than that. So if you are not getting that kind of activity, the price, the probability is the issue is price. There's nothing in real estate that you can't fix without a price reduction. Whether it's location, the busy street, whether it's in a mud bog, all of those things can be fixed with price. Just depends on how big a price reduction it's going to take to make that property sell. But we have 6 weeks still. We have a good 6 weeks yet to get houses sold this year and closed. So now is a great time to get a price reduction. Rerun your comps. Go back to your comps and rerun them now that you've maybe had the listing a month or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. If you've had them that long, I would definitely go back and reevaluate the comps and identify whether the average price of a comparable home has gone up or has it gone down, and adjust accordingly. Obviously, if it's not selling, the likelihood is that at best the values for that comparable properties has stayed the same or gone down, the average price. How long has a home been on the market? Is it market weary? Should you get out there and take some fall pictures as we start to see the colors change? The answer is absolutely. Try to freshen it in any way you can, but also recognize that throwing money at a problem that isn't a marketing problem is really a waste of money. It's kind of an act of desperation. So I hate to see agents who've had a listing for a month or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 go out and spend more money on marketing when the market is more than sufficient to bring a buyer if that property is properly priced. It's just basic supply and demand. Are there more or enough buyers to buy that house that's provided at the price that it is listed at, or do they have other options, better options for that price? So what I found over the years is that if I'm 10% high, I'm not getting any action at all. I'm not getting showings. I'm certainly not getting offers. And so if the real price is 200 and I'm at 220, I need to get down to 200. if I'm at even at 210, if I can get a 5% price reduction, if I'm not getting any action at all, if I can get a 5% price reduction, that sort of puts me in the red zone. Okay, that kind of gives me, I'm now within the target range, because if I can get within 5% of the actual sales price, I'm going to start to see traffic, I'm going to start to see offers. So I would encourage all of you, if you have houses that are on the market, have been on the market, have gotten some activity or no activity at all, that you go back and revisit your comps, really take a hard, sharp pencil to it, and see where you might be able to go after a price reduction. Again, over the course of the next 6 weeks, you could cash a couple of 3 or more paychecks simply by getting price reductions right now. So I think we've covered quite a bit here today. We're about 20 minutes in. So I'm going to let you go. If you have any questions, we have any questions, Don? Okay, well, that's really all I had for you today. There was a lot of stuff crammed in there, so hopefully you can sort it out. Look at that link about the seller's disclosure exemptions. And again, if you have questions, give Eric or me a call, or pop onto Facebook Connect and write a note, and we'll do our best to answer it. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you next week. Oh, by the way, are we still on? All right. By the way, next week we're going to have an environmental expert, Gina Harms from our Muskegon office, is going to join as a special guest to answer some questions about environmental consulting. So watch for that next week. All right. Talk to you then.